If you look into this image, you'll see that there are different places on Earth, right? And each of the places comes with a unique set of challenges. Despite those challenges, we see that plants are able to survive in such a challenge as well as they're able to thrive, right? So in this chapter, what we are going to do is we are going to look into the features that the plants have that helps them survive in all the different types of climates that we have on Earth, right? So that is what we call as an adaptation in plants. Before we move on to adaptation, try to answer this question. Say, for example, if I have a cactus, right? And I try to grow a cactus tree in a pond. Will it be able to grow or survive? Or say if I have a lotus plant and I try to grow that lotus plant in mountains. So will it be able to survive? It is related to adaptation. What is an adaptation? So we know that plants live in different places such as desert, ponds, mountains and coastal areas like this, right? All these places have different conditions, right? For example, a desert may have very less water, right? It may have very large amount of heat, right? So all of them have different conditions. A coastal area may have very strong wind and it is situated near to the coast, so plenty of water and salt, right? So every place have different condition. So to survive, plants have special features called adaptation. So this plant will have a specific set of feature that this will not have, and this will have a specific set of feature that this will not have. Why? Because it needs the feature to survive in a desert. It needs the features to survive in the coastal areas, right? So such features are known as adaptations. What is the purpose of adaptation? Adaptation helps them to live, or basically to survive, to grow and to reproduce in their habitats, right? Mainly we'll have two different types of adaptation. The first one is terrestrial, the second one is aquatic. What are terrestrial plants? Plants that grow on land are known as terrestrial plants, right? And such plants have again special features to survive in the land, right? What are the different types of terrestrial plants that we have? We have a plain, we have a desert, we have a mountain, and then we have coast and marsh, right? So first of all, we'll discuss about plains, right? What is a plain? It has the most optimum type of climate for a plant to grow, right? So the climate is moderate, it is warm in summer, cold in winter, as what we expect it to be, right? Rainfall is also sufficient, so it is the best suited for plant growth, right? And that is why most of the trees or plants that we see are in the plains. Okay, what are some of the examples of plants that adapt to plains? They are mango, neem, and banyan, right? What type of adaptation do we see in such plants? They have broad leaves, right? So they have broad leaves so that they can capture plenty of sunlight. Okay, and their branches. So if you notice, they have very well spread branches, right? It is to get more light and air, right? So they have broad leaves to capture more sunlight, and they have wide branches to get more light and air. Now we move on to desert. So deserts are characterized by hot climate, right? Dry climate and dusty. Right? So deserts are basically hot, dry and dusty. What type of plants that we see in desert? We have cactus and babool. What are the adaptations that we see in plants that live in the desert? Because there is very less water, right? So the adaptations are such that the plants should survive in scarcity of water. The first adaptation is their leaves are reduced to spines. So if you particularly look into cactus, the leaves are reduced to spines. Why is that the case? It is to minimize loss of water, right? What stores water? We have very thick stem, right, which is green as well. So photosynthesis in cactus is done by the stem and not the leaves. So we have thick green stem that stores water, right? So that it can be used in times of scarcity. The stem has waxy coating to minimize loss of water, right? Their roots are deep and wide so that they can penetrate deep in the soil and extract water from them, right? How does these adaptation help? So these features reduce water loss and help the plant store and collect water from deep inside the soil, right? Another benefit of having spine is that it discourages the animals to eat the plant, right? Next we have mountains. So mountains are characterized by very cold climate and they are often accompanied by snowfall, right? What are the types of trees that we see in mountains? They are pine and fir tree, right? What are the adaptation plants are required to have in such a cold climate? The first type of adaptation is needle-like leaves. So they have needle-like leaves to minimize water loss. They have cone shape and sloping branches. So they have cone shape and sloping branches in order to help the snow slide off, right? Otherwise, the leaves or the stem won't be able to carry the weight of this snow and it will eventually fall off, right? So these adaptations help them to survive in the cold climate. Another thing you'll notice is that most of the trees that stay in the mountain, right, or live in the mountain, they don't have flowers, rather they have cones, right? As we have discussed in flowering versus non-flowering plants, so they have cones wherein the seeds are stored, right? And such types of plants that live in the mountains are also known as coniferous trees for such a reason, right? Next we have the coastal region. So coastal region are very hot, they are very wet, and it has very strong winds as well, right? At the same time the water there is salty and the soil is, so if you have gone to a beach you'll notice that the soil is just like a sand. So we call that type of a soil a sandy soil, right? What type of trees grow in coastal regions? So for example, coconut. Why do they grow? Because they have some specific adaptation. They have flexible trunk so that they could withstand the strong winds. They have fibrous root so that it can hold firm in the sandy soil that it has, right? Their leaves are just like feathers to navigate the strong wind as well. And their fruits also contain water, right? The next type of climate or habitat that we have is marshy, right? So in a marsh type of climate, you'll see that the soil is clay, right? Just like a mud, right? We also have some trees growing on in that region, but it has a certain set of challenges as well. So the roots there won't be able to breathe. Why? Because the soil is very sticky, right? It does not allow the root to breathe. So such type of plants, you must have noticed that plants have, so if you just have a tree, right? It has roots like this. So these are known as breathing roots, right? So they breathe from the air around it. So such type of plants that grow in the marshy region have breathing roots. For example, the mangrove tree, right? So this type of adaptation helps the plant survive in the marshy areas. So these are all the terrestrial plants that we have. Next, we have aquatic plants. So the plants that live in water are known as aquatic plants. And just like we had multiple habitats for terrestrial plants, we have different habitats for aquatic plants as well. So based on the different types of habitats, there are three types of aquatic plants. The first type is floating plants, then we have fixed aquatic plants, and finally we have submerged plants, right? How are they different from each other? Let us see. So the floating plants, they float freely on the surface of water. So if you notice this example, it is floating freely on the surface of water, and at the same time the roots are not attached to the soil. The roots are just beneath this surface of water, right? So they float freely on the surface of water and they are not attached to the soil. The roots are not attached to the soil. So this is the property of floating plants. What are some examples? The first example is duckweed. The other example is water hyacinth. So then we have the fixed aquatic plants, right? So in case of fixed aquatic plants, we have this flower and the leaves. So they float on the water surface, however, the roots are attached to the soil. So this is the difference between these two. Here, the plants, the entire plant used to float on the surface of water and the roots were not attached to the soil. Here, the flower and the leaves, they float on the surface of water, however, the roots are attached to the soil. At the same time, they have very long stalks or very long stem. So they have very long stem to sustain the water currents, right? If their stem are very short and if they have a very strong wave of water, right? So then it will break. So this kind of long and flexible stem helps them to sustain the water current. The leaves and flowers, they float on the water surface and stomata are present on the upper surface of the leaves. So in the previous classes, we have seen that stomata is present in the lower surface of leaves for most of the plants. However, for fixed aquatic plants, they are present in the upper surface. Why? Because if they are present in the lower surface, it will not be able to absorb oxygen from the atmosphere because it is not exposed to the atmosphere. Only the upper part is exposed to the atmosphere. So that is why stomata are present in the upper surface of the leaves for a fixed aquatic plant. Okay. Finally, we have the submerged plant. So in case of submerged plant, you'll see that the entire plant grows completely underwater. Right? Their roots are fixed in the soil as well. However, how is this different? So the entire plant is underwater. Here, you'll see that the flower and the leaf, they are on the surface of water. Right? Here, the entire plant is underwater. Okay. So what are two examples of fixed aquatic plants? The first example is lily. The other example is lotus. Right? So water lily and lotus are two examples of fixed aquatic plants. Coming back to submerged plants, so they grow completely underwater. Their roots are usually fixed in the soil. They have thin flexible leaves and stems. So again, their leaves and stems are thin and flexible. This is to sustain the water current again. Okay. And there are no stomata on the leaves. Right. So they don't have any stomata in the leaves and they absorb oxygen from the water. Okay. So what are some examples of submerged plants? We have hydrilla and then we have tape grass. These are two examples of submerged plants. So we have seen that aquatic plants are the plants that live in water. At the same time, there are three different types of aquatic plants: floating, fixed, and submerged. So they are characterized into three types based on where they live in water. Right? So this concludes our chapter on adaptation in plants.